Tonight, I'll make you mine. The millionaire murmured. She fell for him after the wedding. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. And now, let's return to our main character. Elena Moore is standing perfectly still in the center of a luxury hotel suite that costs more per night than her mother's old car ever did. The air scented faintly with white roses and polished wood. Her wedding dress still hugging her shoulders like a decision she has not fully accepted yet. And behind her she can feel him without seeing him, Julian Cross, her husband by contract. A man whose name alone can move stock prices and silence boardrooms, stepping close enough that his presence alters the temperature of the room. He does not touch her, and somehow that is what makes her pulse race, because when Julian finally speaks, his voice is low, controlled, almost gentle, as if every word has been weighed before release. And he murmurs that tonight he will make her his, not as a threat, not as a lover's claim, but as something far more unsettling, a promise layered with intention. Elena swallows, her fingers curling into the fabric at her sides, knowing this marriage was never meant to feel like this, never meant to reach under her skin. 2 weeks earlier, she had sat across from a long glass table, hands folded, listening as a lawyer explained the terms of a union that would save her mother from drowning in hospital bills and give Julian exactly what he needed to keep control of Cross Holdings. No love, no interference, no expectations beyond appearances, and she had agreed because desperation leaves little room for pride. Now, in this quiet room high above the city, she realizes something has shifted, and she does not yet know if it is dangerous or inevitable. Julian circles slowly, stopping just behind her shoulder, his reflection catching in the mirror, sharp suit lines softened by the loosened tie he has finally allowed himself to undo. And for a moment Elena wonders if he is just as aware of the line they are about to cross. Outside, traffic hums like a distant river, unaware that two strangers have just promised each other a lifetime they never planned to want. Julian's breath brushes her ear as he tells her this night is not about possession, but about honesty, about finally standing in the same truth instead of hiding behind signatures and silence. And Elena feels the weight of that more than any touch. She thinks of the ring on her finger, the contract locked in a safe, the version of herself who believed survival was the same as living, and she realizes this marriage has already begun to test her in ways no agreement ever could. As Julian steps back, giving her space instead of taking it, Elena understands the real danger is not that he might control her, but that he is offering her something she never thought she deserved, the chance to be chosen. And as she turns to face him, her heart pounding, she knows this is only the beginning, not of love yet, but of a quiet war between fear and desire that will decide who they become when the contract no longer protects them. The next morning arrives without ceremony, slipping into the penthouse through floor-to-ceiling windows as Elena Moore wakes in a bed that is not hers, wrapped in sheets that smell faintly of cedar and something unmistakably Julian Cross. And for a few seconds she forgets where she is until the weight of the ring on her finger pulls her back into reality, heavy and unfamiliar. The wedding night had ended not with passion, but with distance, Julian retreating to the opposite side of the suite after that whispered promise, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts and the unnerving realization that he had given her something far more dangerous than desire, attention. She rises quietly, padding across marble floors that echo her uncertainty, and pours herself a glass of water from a crystal carafe, steadying her breath as the city stretches awake below them. This marriage, she reminds herself, is an agreement, nothing more, a transaction designed to solve problems that neither of them could afford to let the public see. 2 weeks earlier, Elena had walked into a law office that felt colder than any hospital room. Her mother's unpaid medical bills folded neatly inside her purse like a ticking clock, and she had listened as Julian's attorney explained how this union would secure his controlling vote in Cross Holdings while offering her a financial shield she could not refuse. Julian had sat across from her then, composed and distant, his eyes sharp but unreadable, as if he were negotiating a merger instead of a marriage. and when the papers slid across the table, she noticed how his pen paused just once before he signed, adding a single handwritten line beneath the typed clauses, stating that if either of them lied, the contract would be void. At the time, she had thought it was a power move, a way to assert control, but standing now in his penthouse kitchen, sunlight catching on steel and glass, Elena wonders if that line was less about dominance and more about fear. She hears Julian before she sees him, the soft sound of bare feet on stone, and turns to find him already dressed, sleeves rolled, coffee in hand, looking every inch the man who commands boardrooms without raising his voice. He does not comment on the space between them, nor on the way she instinctively straightens when he enters the room, and instead he speaks with the same calm precision he had used the night before, telling her that they have a charity gala in 3 days, their first public appearance as a married couple, and that the press will be watching closely. Elena nods, grateful for the familiar ground of logistics. But when he adds that she is free to redecorate the guest room she will be using, she bristles, the reminder of separation landing sharper than she expects. She tells herself that this is what she wanted: independence, boundaries, safety. Yet something in Julian's measured tone suggests that he is testing her reaction, watching for cracks she does not intend to show. As he leaves for the office, Elena wanders the penthouse, noting the absence of personal warmth, the way every object seems curated rather than lived with, and she begins to understand that Julian Cross is not a man who lets anything exist without purpose, including her. Later that afternoon, a call from the hospital confirms her mother's treatment has been approved, funded quietly and completely, and Elena sinks onto the edge of the bed, relief crashing into gratitude and something dangerously close to loyalty. She did not expect the speed, the efficiency, the way Julian had kept his word without asking for thanks, and it unsettles her because it blurs the line she has drawn so carefully between obligation and emotion. That evening, when Julian returns, he finds her standing by the window, city lights flickering across her face, and for a moment, they simply exist in the same space, two strangers bound by ink and circumstance. He tells her that tomorrow she will meet his family, starting with his Aunt Vivian, whose approval is as sharp-edged as her influence. And Elena feels the familiar pull of unease, sensing that this marriage is already asking more of her than she agreed to give. As Julian's gaze lingers, thoughtful and unreadable, Elena realizes that whatever this contract was meant to protect them from, it has already begun to expose truths neither of them can afford to ignore, and somewhere beneath the polished calm, the real test is quietly taking shape. Days begin to settle into a strange rhythm after the wedding, not uncomfortable enough to escape, not warm enough to call home, and Elena more quickly learns that being married to Julian Cross means living inside carefully measured silences. They move through the penthouse like parallel lines, rarely touching, rarely colliding, each aware of the other in a way that feels deliberate rather than accidental. Elena claims the guest room as agreed, unpacking only half her clothes, leaving the rest folded in her suitcase as if she might need to leave quickly, while Julian keeps to his office late into the night, returning with the quiet precision of a man who does not like to be seen when he is tired. Every morning, she wakes to the soft hum of the city and the distant clink of a coffee cup, and every evening, she goes to sleep knowing he is somewhere beyond the walls, awake, thinking, calculating. The ring on her finger remains a constant weight, not heavy enough to hurt, but impossible to forget, and she notices that Julian never removes his, even during meetings, even when he is alone with his thoughts. Their first week together is filled with small tests disguised as courtesy, Julian asking whether she prefers sparkling or still water, Elena declining the personal assistant he offers her, choosing instead to navigate the building on her own, learning the quiet confidence of its staff and the unspoken rules of a world she has only ever seen from the outside. At night, she scrolls through old photographs on her phone, reminders of a life defined by borrowed spaces and temporary solutions, and she wonders when this marriage began to feel less like a shield and more like a mirror. Julian observes her in the same careful way he studies market shifts, noting how she never wastes food, how she turns off lights when leaving a room, how she reads contracts twice before signing even the smallest delivery form. and he finds himself unsettled by the fact that she asks for nothing beyond what was promised. This is not how it is supposed to work, he thinks, accustomed to people reaching for his wealth long before they understand him, and Elena's restraint feels like a challenge he did not anticipate. Their first shared event arrives quietly, a private dinner with donors at Julian's townhouse, and Elena prepares with the calm focus of someone who knows she will be judged before she speaks. Julian offers to have a stylist sent over, and she refuses without apology, choosing a simple black dress she bought years ago, altering it herself the night before, her fingers steady as she stitches, reminding herself that appearances are not the same as worth. When Julian sees her that evening, something shifts in his expression, not desire, but recognition, as if he is seeing a version of her that cannot be purchased or arranged. The dinner passes without incident, Elena navigating conversations with grace, listening more than she speaks, and Julian notices how donors respond to her sincerity, how their guarded smiles soften when she asks about their work instead of their influence. On the drive home, the city lights flicker across the windshield, and Julian breaks the silence by thanking her for handling herself well, the words clipped but genuine, and Elena responds that she is simply doing her part, reminding him that this is still an agreement. The reminder lands harder than she intends, and Julian tightens his grip on the steering wheel, realizing that for the first time in years, he is unsure where he stands. Later that night, Elena hears raised voices through the walls, Julian on the phone with his Aunt Vivian, their conversation sharp and controlled, and though she cannot make out every word, she hears her own name, followed by silence, followed by Julian's quiet refusal. She sits on the edge of her bed, heart racing, understanding that she has become more than a signature in a contract, more than a convenient solution, and that realization is both thrilling and terrifying. As the days continue, the space between them fills with unspoken questions, each glance a negotiation, each shared moment a reminder that this marriage, built on necessity, is slowly becoming something neither of them can fully control, and Elena cannot shake the feeling that the hardest part is still ahead, waiting patiently for the moment when pretending will no longer be enough. The night of the charity gala arrives wrapped in quiet tension, the kind that settles beneath silk and crystal and waits to see who will crack first. And as Elena Moore steps out of the car beside Julian Cross, flashes of cameras slice through the darkness, freezing them into a single image the city is eager to consume. She keeps her posture calm, her hand light on his arm, aware of every movement, every breath, knowing this is the moment their marriage shifts from private arrangement to public performance. Inside the ballroom, the air hums with money and influence, chandeliers throwing warm light over gowns and tailored suits, and Elena feels the familiar pressure of being assessed, weighed, measured against expectations she never agreed to meet. Julian moves with effortless authority, greeting donors and executives by name, his voice steady, his attention divided between the room and the woman beside him, and she senses his awareness like a quiet current pulling her forward. As they circulate, Elena notices how conversations subtly change when she joins them, how questions soften, how people listen when she speaks, not because of the ring on her finger, but because she meets their eyes and speaks with a sincerity that cannot be rehearsed. It is during a brief pause near the balcony that the test comes, delivered with a polite smile and a blade hidden beneath it, when an older investor, glass of champagne in hand, comments loudly enough for others to hear that Julian's new wife must have had remarkable timing to land such a marriage, implying opportunity rather than choice. The surrounding laughter is thin, expectant, and Elena feels the moment stretch, all eyes flicking toward Julian, waiting for him to intervene, to correct, to protect. He does not move. Instead, he watches her, giving her space, offering her something rarer than rescue, respect. Elena inhales slowly, her pulse steady despite the heat rising in her chest, and responds with calm precision, stating that timing matters less than character, and that she did not marry Julian Cross for his name, but for the integrity he shows when no one is watching. The room quiets, the comment dissolving into something awkward and unfinished, and the investor murmurs an apology before retreating, his confidence deflated. Julian's gaze sharpens, not with anger, but with something like admiration, and as they move on, Elena feels the weight of the moment settle into her bones. Later, as speeches begin and applause echoes through the hall, Julian leans closer, his voice low, thanking her for handling the situation with grace, and Elena answers honestly that she did not need saving, only the chance to speak. The words linger between them, unchallenged. As the evening progresses, Elena finds herself drawn into conversations about philanthropy, about community programs and education initiatives, topics she speaks on not from strategy, but from experience, and donors respond, intrigued by her perspective, engaged by her authenticity. Julian watches from a distance, noting how the room shifts around her, how influence does not always announce itself with volume or wealth, and he realizes that Elena more commands attention without demanding it. When the gala finally winds down and they step back into the night, the city quieter now, Julian opens the car door for her, a small gesture that feels loaded with meaning, and for a moment neither of them speaks. On the drive home, the tension that filled the ballroom gives way to something more intimate, less defined, and Julian breaks the silence by asking her why she chose to respond the way she did. Elena turns toward the window, lights blurring past, and answers that she has spent too much of her life being underestimated to stay silent now, that she refuses to disappear just because it makes others comfortable. Julian nods, absorbing the truth of it, and as they arrive at the penthouse, he realizes the balance between them has shifted, subtly but undeniably. That night, as Elena removes her earrings and prepares for bed, she senses that the gala has changed more than their public image. It has altered the rules of their arrangement, and somewhere in the quiet space between them, a new understanding has taken root, one that promises both connection and conflict, and leaves Elena wondering what Julian Cross will do next now that he has seen her stand on her own. The quiet after the gala feels heavier than the night itself, settling into the penthouse as Elena more slips off her heels and sets them neatly by the door, her body tired but her mind restless, replaying the looks, the words, the moment she chose to speak instead of waiting to be defended. Julian Cross stands near the windows, jacket discarded, city lights reflecting in the glass behind him, his posture controlled yet tense, as if the room is holding its breath along with him. For a long moment neither of them speaks, the space between them charged with everything that was not said in public, and when Julian finally turns, his voice is low and deliberate, asking her why she did not let him stop the man who questioned her place at his side. Elena feels the question land deeper than he intends, and she answers honestly, telling him she did not marry him to be managed, that she does not want to be his responsibility or his shield, and that if she is going to stand next to him, it will be on her own feet. The words hang in the air, calm but unyielding, and Julian's composure fractures just enough to reveal surprise, followed by something sharper, something like frustration turned inward. He steps closer, not invading her space, but closing the distance enough that she can feel the heat of his presence, and he admits that he did not step in because he wanted to see what she would do, because part of him needed to know if she would fold or fight. Elena stiffens, the admission striking a nerve, and she asks him if this marriage is another test, another calculation in a life built on leverage and outcomes. Julian exhales slowly, running a hand through his hair, and for the first time since she met him, his voice loses its polished edge as he says that he has spent his entire life watching people perform for him, telling him what they think he wants to hear, and that he is tired of not knowing who is real. The confession catches Elena off guard, softening her anger into something more complicated, and she responds that she knows what it is like to be reduced to a role, to be seen as a solution instead of a person. The silence that follows is not empty, but full, layered with understanding neither of them expected to find. Julian turns away, pacing once, then stops, telling her that when he said he would make her his, he did not mean ownership, he meant honesty, a line he has never crossed with anyone else. Elena absorbs this, her heartbeat steadying as she realizes he is not asking for submission, but for presence, and she admits that what scares her is not losing herself to him, but wanting something she never planned to ask for. They stand there, the distance between them narrowing not by movement, but by truth, and Julian says quietly that he does not want her compliance, he wants her choice. The simplicity of the statement unsettles her more than any grand gesture could, and she looks at him, really looks, seeing not the billionaire or the strategist, but a man who has built walls so high he forgot how to step beyond them. Elena tells him that choice requires trust, and trust cannot be demanded or scheduled, and Julian nods, accepting the boundary without argument. He steps back then, giving her room, and says that he will sleep in his office tonight, not as punishment or distance, but as proof that he heard her. As he leaves, Elena sinks onto the couch, the tension draining from her shoulders, aware that something irreversible has just occurred. This marriage, born of necessity, has shifted into a place neither of them fully understands, and as she stares out at the city, lights blinking like unanswered questions, Elena realizes that the real danger is no longer the contract or the public eye, but the quiet pull drawing them toward a connection neither of them can afford to pretend away. Somewhere down the hall, a door closes softly, and Elena knows that when it opens again, the terms between them will never be the same, setting the stage for choices that will test not just their agreement, but their hearts. Morning arrives softly after the night of honesty, and Elena more wakes with the sense that something unseen has shifted, like a door left ajar in a quiet house. Julian Cross does not appear at breakfast, and she is told he left early for the office. His schedule suddenly rearranged, meetings cleared without explanation. The absence feels intentional, respectful, and it unsettles her more than his presence ever did. Elena spends the morning walking the city alone, letting familiar streets ground her, passing storefronts and coffee shops that remind her of a life lived without safety nets, a life where choices were made quickly and consequences arrived faster. She wanders into a small art supply store tucked between a laundromat and a florist, the smell of paper and paint stirring memories she rarely allows herself to touch. Memories of late nights sketching by a cracked window, of dreams paused rather than abandoned. She runs her fingers along a shelf of charcoal pencils, wondering when she stopped believing her hands were worth trusting. That afternoon, Julian sends a single message, brief and neutral, telling her he will be late again, and she replies with the same careful tone, both of them honoring the space they agreed to give. What Elena does not know is that Julian spends the day far from boardrooms, standing inside an old gallery building on the edge of the arts district, its windows dusty, its walls scarred with the ghosts of exhibitions long forgotten. He listens as a property manager explains zoning restrictions and renovation costs, nodding as if this were another acquisition. Yet something about the space feels different, personal, and Julian realizes that for once he is not calculating profit, but possibility. He remembers Elena's steady hands, the way she spoke about creativity not as ambition, but as survival, and he signs the papers without telling anyone why. When Julian returns to the penthouse late that night, Elena is curled on the couch with a book, her hair loose, her posture relaxed in a way he has not seen before, and he pauses, watching her for a moment longer than necessary. She looks up, meeting his gaze, and neither of them moves, the silence between them no longer sharp, but curious. Julian asks her about her day, and she answers honestly, telling him about the art store, about the familiar ache of wanting something she once gave up, and instead of offering solutions, he listens, his attention steady, unbroken. He tells her that wanting does not make her weak, and she counters that wanting without means once taught her caution. The conversation drifts, gentle, unguarded, and Elena surprises herself by admitting that she never planned to stay in this marriage longer than necessary, that she expected to leave once her mother recovered, taking the money and the memories with her. Julian absorbs this without reaction, though it confirms what he has suspected all along, that she has been living with one foot always pointed toward the exit. He tells her that he understands, that contracts end and people move on, but the way he says it carries weight, as if he is testing his own acceptance. Later, as they prepare for bed in their separate spaces, Elena hesitates outside his office door, the light beneath it casting a narrow line across the floor, and she considers knocking, not to cross a boundary, but to acknowledge what has grown between them. She does not knock, choosing instead to trust the silence, and retreats to her room, heart steady, mind restless. Over the next few days, Julian continues to keep his distance, honoring his promise, while Elena notices small changes around the penthouse, art books placed on the coffee table, a cleared wall in the hallway, an empty space that feels intentional. She asks him nothing, sensing that whatever he is doing must remain unsaid for now. The restraint becomes a quiet language between them, a way of communicating without pressure or demand. Elena feels something new taking shape, not romance yet, but recognition, and it frightens her because it suggests a future she has not planned for. As she stands by the window one evening, watching the city glow, Elena realizes that the wound she carries is not just poverty or sacrifice, but the belief that her dreams were temporary, disposable, and that belief is being challenged not by words, but by Julian's actions. Somewhere beyond her view, plans are forming that will test not just her trust, but her willingness to be seen. And as the days edge forward, Elena senses that whatever Julian Cross is preparing will force her to confront the part of herself she buried long before she ever signed his name. The fracture arrives quietly, disguised as information, and Elena more does not feel it until it is already too deep to ignore, the truth slipping into place during a routine lunch she did not plan to attend. She is seated across from Julian Cross at a private dining room near his office, a rare midday meeting prompted by his Aunt Vivian's request to discuss upcoming board matters, and Elena senses the shift the moment Vivian enters, her smile precise, her gaze calculating. Conversation flows smoothly at first, polite and measured, until Vivian mentions the contract with casual familiarity, referring to Elena not as Julian's wife, but as a strategic asset whose timing worked out better than expected. Elena's attention sharpens, the word asset echoing louder than intended, and when Vivian casually adds that Julian knew exactly how she would be perceived by investors, how her background would draw scrutiny and soften opposition, something inside Elena goes still. She looks to Julian, expecting denial, explanation, anything that contradicts the implication hanging in the air, but his silence stretches just a second too long, and in that pause, understanding lands with devastating clarity. Vivian continues, unbothered, remarking that placing Elena beside him was a masterstroke, that it neutralized several dissenting votes by reframing Julian's image, and Elena realizes this is not speculation, but confirmation. She excuses herself politely, standing before either of them can respond, her movements steady despite the tremor running beneath her skin, and leaves the restaurant without looking back. By the time she reaches the street, the city noise crashes over her, overwhelming, and she walks without direction, her thoughts circling one brutal question: how much Julian knew and when. Back at the penthouse, Elena unlocks the safe she was told she would never need to open, her hands sure, her resolve sharper than her fear, and retrieves the contract they signed weeks ago, scanning the pages until her eyes land on the handwritten clause Julian added himself, stating that if either of them lied, the agreement would be void. The words blur, not because she cannot read them, but because she understands them too well. When Julian returns that evening, he finds her seated at the dining table, the contract laid out between them like evidence, and he knows immediately that something has broken. Elena does not raise her voice, does not accuse him with anger, but asks one simple question: whether he knew his aunt would use her, whether he anticipated the scrutiny, the humiliation, the risk. Julian hesitates, and that hesitation is answer enough. He admits that he suspected, that he did not intervene because he believed Elena was strong enough to handle it, because the outcome mattered, because the company mattered. The admission lands harder than any denial could, and Elena feels the last thread of trust snap cleanly. She tells him that strength does not excuse deception, that choosing someone without their full consent is still a form of control, no matter how carefully it is justified. Julian tries to explain, to tell her that he never intended to hurt her, that he believed transparency would come later, but Elena cuts him off, pointing to the contract, to the line he wrote himself, and states calmly that he lied by omission, that he allowed her to walk into a battlefield without all the information, and that the agreement they both relied on is now void. The word hangs between them, heavy and final. Julian's composure falters, his certainty dissolving as he realizes the cost of his calculation, and he asks her what she wants, what it will take to fix this. Elena stands, gathering the contract, her expression resolute, and tells him that this was never about fixing terms, it was about choosing honesty when it mattered, and he failed that choice. She informs him that she will be moving out, not immediately, but soon, that she will not be managed or leveraged again, and that whatever they shared beyond the contract cannot survive without truth. Julian watches her walk away, the silence left behind louder than any argument, and for the first time in his life, he understands that the deal he thought he controlled has ended on terms he did not choose, setting in motion consequences that no amount of influence can undo, and leaving him to confront the reality that losing Elena Moore is not a strategic setback, but a personal reckoning he did not see coming. The days after Elena Moore declares the contract void pass in a quiet that feels heavier than any argument, the penthouse stripped of tension but not of consequence, and when she finally begins packing, Julian Cross does not stop her. He watches from a distance as she folds her clothes with careful precision, noticing how little she brought into his world and how easily she could leave it behind. He tells her only that he understands, that she should take the time she needs, and she nods, accepting the restraint without forgiveness. What Elena does not know is that while she prepares her exit, Julian is dismantling something else entirely, piece by piece, beginning with the assumptions that once guided him. He spends his nights not in boardrooms or offices, but in the old gallery building he purchased weeks ago, overseeing renovations he insisted remain minimal, preserving the scars on the walls, the imperfect floors, the history embedded in the space. He refuses branding consultants and corporate plaques, instructing the team to leave the building nameless for now, insisting that when the doors open, they open for a reason that cannot be marketed. When Julian finally asks Elena to meet him, his message is brief, respectful, offering no explanation, only an address and a time, and though every instinct tells her to decline, curiosity rooted in unfinished truth draws her there. The building stands quiet when she arrives, its exterior unassuming, lights glowing softly through tall windows, and Elena hesitates at the door, uncertain whether this is another test or something more honest. Inside, the air smells faintly of fresh paint and old wood, and the space opens around her, warm and understated, the walls lined with her work. Sketches she thought lost, studies she never finished, pieces pulled from storage, from forgotten folders, from moments she never shared with anyone, each framed simply, respectfully, without embellishment. Elena's breath catches as she moves through the gallery, recognizing not just the art, but the care with which it has been presented, the intention behind every placement. Julian stands at the far end of the room, hands at his sides, watching her reaction without intrusion, and when she finally turns to him, her voice unsteady, he speaks first, telling her that he did not bring her here to ask for anything. He explains that he realized too late that he had treated her strength as a resource rather than a truth, that he believed outcomes justified methods, and that belief cost him her trust. He gestures to the walls, telling her that this space is hers, that the gallery will open under her name, funded without conditions, managed without interference, and that she owes him nothing in return. Elena listens, emotions colliding inside her, gratitude tangled with caution, and asks him why now, why after the contract is gone. Julian answers simply that when the contract ended, he lost the right to assume anything, including her presence, and that this is not an apology designed to fix what broke, but an acknowledgement of what he failed to protect. He tells her that he never wanted to own her, never wanted to control her, and that the words he whispered on their wedding night were meant to promise honesty, not possession, a promise he broke and is trying to honor now without expectation. Elena walks the gallery once more, touching the edge of a frame, absorbing the weight of being seen without being claimed, and realizes that this gesture does not ask her to stay, it gives her the freedom to choose. She turns back to Julian and tells him that trust cannot be restored with money or grand reveals, that it grows slowly, through consistency and respect, and he accepts this without argument, telling her that if she walks away tonight, the gallery will still open, her work will still stand, and her future will still be hers alone. The quiet between them settles into something gentler, less fragile, and Elena understands that this is the first time Julian Cross has offered her something without leverage. As she steps outside into the evening air, the city humming around her, Elena feels the pull of a choice she did not expect to face so soon, aware that the next step she takes will not be dictated by necessity or contract, but by desire, and somewhere behind her, Julian remains in the gallery, waiting not for forgiveness, but for the answer she has not yet given. Elena Moore does not return to the penthouse that night, choosing instead the quiet of a small apartment borrowed from a friend, where the walls are plain and the air feels honest, and she sleeps more deeply than she has in weeks, her dreams untroubled by contracts or expectations. In the morning, she wakes with clarity rather than certainty, knowing only that whatever she chooses next must belong to her. Over the following days, she visits the gallery again, not to see Julian, but to sit among the pieces she once believed were fragments of a past life, now standing whole and unhidden, and she begins to sketch again, slowly, deliberately, letting herself imagine a future that is not defined by survival alone. Julian Cross does not call or message, honoring the space he promised, focusing instead on repairing the damage he caused where it matters most, dismantling his Aunt Vivian's influence within the board, refusing deals that rely on optics rather than integrity, and when questioned, he answers simply that some losses are necessary to gain perspective. The gallery opens quietly a week later. No press release, no grand unveiling, just doors unlocked and lights spilling onto the sidewalk, and Elena arrives early, surprised to find Julian already there, standing to the side, not as host or benefactor, but as a witness. He tells her he will leave if she prefers, and she tells him to stay, not because she owes him anything, but because she wants him to see what she has reclaimed. As guests begin to arrive, drawn by curiosity rather than hype, Elena moves through the space with calm confidence, answering questions about her work, her process, her journey, and Julian watches as she commands the room without needing permission, realizing that loving her will always mean choosing her freedom first. When the evening winds down and the last guest leaves, Elena locks the door and turns to find Julian waiting, not expectant, not hopeful, simply present. She tells him that trust is not restored by one gesture or one apology, but by the willingness to stand beside someone without guarantees, and he listens, nodding, accepting that truth without defense. She admits that she is afraid, not of him, but of wanting something real after building her life around contingency, and Julian responds that he is afraid too, of choosing without contracts to protect him, of offering his heart without leverage. They stand there, the gallery quiet around them, art breathing on the walls, and Elena steps closer, not because she is certain, but because she chooses to be honest. She tells him that she is not coming back as his wife by agreement, but as a woman deciding whether love is worth the risk, and Julian answers that he does not want ownership or assurances, only the chance to choose her every day without obligation. Elena smiles softly, recognizing the difference, and whispers that tonight she is already his, not because he claimed her, but because she chose to stay. The words settle between them, not as a promise of permanence, but as a beginning rooted in equality. Months later, the penthouse no longer feels like a stage, but a home shaped by shared decisions, laughter echoing where silence once ruled, and when they speak of the past, it is without bitterness, understanding that mistakes were the cost of growth. Elena's gallery thrives, becoming a place for voices long overlooked, and Julian supports it not as a benefactor, but as a partner who knows when to step back. Their story does not end with a perfect resolution, but with a choice renewed, again and again, to lead with honesty over control and connection over convenience. And if there is one lesson to take from their journey, it is this: love is not a contract to be enforced or a role to be played. It is a decision made freely, sustained by respect, courage, and truth. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that real connection begins where power ends, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes that love should be chosen, not negotiated, because your support helps us continue bringing stories that speak quietly but stay with you long after the screen fades to black.